in. Just to let everyone know that this meeting is being recorded. That will be very helpful to those who could not make it. So the way we're going to work it is I'm going to introduce Miguel Tremblay from Foten, and he'll introduce his team. I just let you know that there is no city staff here, and that's because this is not filed. This is a plan that is not filed for application. So so staff do not attend until it is a plan, so they can work on it. Otherwise, things could change, and then their comments wouldn't be very valid. But we'll do our best to answer the questions specific on city plan from the city side on rules of the game. Okay, so we ask that you use the chat feature for questions. A lot of them were submitted in advance, so we do know a lot of them. But comments, we won't have time to read them. So just hang in there. You can put comments in, but we'll take questions. That way we can answer them. And I thank everyone for coming out on a lovely evening and to listen to this presentation and to ask questions. Okay, so I'll hand it over to you, Miguel.
Thank you, Councillor. You can hear me?
I can.
Okay, thank you. My name is Miguel Tremblay. I'm a partner at Foten Planning and Design. And what I'll do is maybe we are the land use planners for the applicant. Maybe what I can do is make a few opening remarks. I'll introduce our team. I'll maybe give you a bit of an idea of the format and how we're going to approach this evening. We have about an hour set aside, but we're happy to go further and stick around a little bit. We have had the benefit of some preliminary comments from Facebook and the councillor's office, the community association. So we'll try to keep our presentation short, but at the same time, I think there is a little bit of value in elaborating a little bit more so that maybe we can be a little preemptive with some of your comments. For instance, some of the comments that we received is there going to be a fence around the perimeter of the property? Yes, there will be, and maybe through the presentation we can answer some of those. Then Nico Church from our office will be providing a bit of a context, physical context, and a policy and zoning overview. You're going to hear that there's some existing permissions, but also that we are submitting a zoning bylaw amendment application. Given that there is no municipal planner here, Nico will spend a little bit of time explaining what the applications are. There's a range of applications that you submit when you're doing development applications. So maybe Nico, if you can make sure to supplement a little bit for the fact that the city is not here yet. Then Ryan Coolwine from Project One Studios is the project architect, and he's going to give you an overview of the design and our design approach. And then lastly, Matt Mantle from Parsons is here, and Matt is a transportation engineer, and he will be preparing a TIA in support of the development. So he can maybe walk you through some of his early findings, if you will. And I say early in that we're in the very early stages. We haven't submitted an application yet. We are working towards a zoning bylaw amendment. We thought there was some urgency to this meeting because typically, well, first of all, your councillor really wanted to have it. And I think it's important. And number two, we wanted to avoid the summer rush. Typically, we don't do public consultations in July and August. You don't get very good turnouts, so it kind of defeats the purpose. So there was some urgency, and thank you for arranging your schedules to accommodate us. But we are in the early stages right now of preparing plans and reports in support of that zoning application. So this is when consultation is most beneficial. And at the same time, don't be disappointed. We may not have all the answers. The plans that you're going to see are work in progress. For instance, Matt's transportation study is by no means finalized. This is where you get to provide some input and tell him certain things that you're concerned about, whether it's cut through traffic or those kind of things that Matt can be mindful of in submitting his applications. We are here on behalf of Edward Hayes and Ralph Esposito. So they've tied up the property. They're committed to buying it. A little bit about those guys is they are now some regular clients for us out of Montreal. And together they own and operate over 1,000 apartment units. Ryan, Nico, and myself are working on another project for them right now on March Road. And construction is imminent for 788 March Road. And through their work in Ottawa, they've identified this area as another area where they'd like to submit a project. And they think that there are opportunities for some seniors-oriented rental apartments. So that is how the project is being designed now by Project One Studios. What you're going to hear is that we are submitting a zoning amendment. There are permissions for a 6-story building on the site. There's a range of commercial uses as well that you're going to hear, and Nico will spend a little bit of time on the zoning, but there are permissions for a 6-story building. However, we'd like to submit a zoning amendment to do 2 smaller 9-story buildings. And yes, they are higher than the permitted 6, but we also think there's value in exploring that with you because we think we can do a better job with the 2 9-story buildings. We think we can transfer some of the density into the 9-story portions and free up other portions of the site for a little bit of surface parking for visitors, reduce the massing of the building along Carling Avenue, which will, I think, lighten the project, lighten the building. And there's certain things that we'd like to achieve, which also includes greater setbacks and separation to the rear. So we'd like to explore all of these things with you. And then we'd like to submit a zoning bylaw amendment to increase the height to 9 stories. Nico will walk you through some of the particulars, but that's the intent of this evening really, is to talk about maybe transferring some of those densities to 9-story buildings. So with that in mind, if Nico, I don't know if you're able to share your screen now.
Just pulling it up now.
Yeah, in terms of housekeeping, it is difficult for us. We won't be responding, I don't think, to any of the chats. It's like we'll focus on the questions, and we'll let the counselor's office decipher some of the questions that are coming through. So I can see your screen, so I'm going to assume that everybody else can. So maybe Nico, if you want to walk through a little bit some of the policies and context.
Sure. Thank you, Miguel. So we're here tonight for 3430 Carling Avenue. So just in terms of where we are at, Miguel touched upon it a little bit in terms of the application status, and Councillor Kavanagh also spoke to it a little. We haven't filed any applications yet. With respect to this particular site and this particular proposal, we'd start by submitting a zoning bylaw amendment application, or ZBLA. You could also use the term rezoning. Those can be used interchangeably. So those are developments that do require an amendment to the zoning, to the zoning provisions that are currently in place. And it's not uncommon for that to happen in Ottawa. There's quite often some rezoning applications that go through. So for instance, for us, we are looking at increasing the building height. We may also identify other provisions moving forward that do need to be amended moving forward. Once the rezoning is approved, or these processes can happen concurrently to a certain extent, we also have a site plan control application. And that looks a lot more at the nuts and bolts of a design and how a development is going to operate moving forward. So the site servicing strategy will go in more depth once there's the site plan application, or how will garbage operate, or some landscape details, and so on and so forth. So again, it really gets down into the details in the site plan application. And it's important to note, in the rezoning application, in the site plan application, these are accompanied by a number of different studies and plans that are prepared in order to support the proposals. And those go through a very rigorous technical review by city staff and other commenting agencies. Especially at the site plan stage, but also the rezoning stage, geotechnical studies, civil servicing and stormwater studies, architectural plans, and so on and so forth. There's quite a bit of detail that goes into this. Once we receive site plan approval, then the developer can move forward with obtaining building permits and beginning construction. So where we are at, we are to the left of the ZBLA icon. We haven't even yet submitted. We're looking at submitting hopefully in late July, depending on the timing of those studies that are in the process of being prepared. So tonight we are really hoping that this is a good opportunity to speak with you ahead of time, to walk you through the proposed developments at its current stage. Again, it is subject to change moving forward. And it's a good opportunity to solicit feedback early on in the process. So diving right into the site, I'm sure many of you or all of you are familiar with it. It's at 3430 Carling Avenue, and it's quite a large site. It's about 45 meters deep, and it's also around a little bit over 140 meters of frontage along Carling, so just to the south of Carling Avenue. It's important to note also Carling Avenue is going to be quite wide. It's projected to be around 44.5 meters wide at this particular juncture of Carling. So whenever new applications come in, the city makes sure to hold on to parcels in front of those properties to eventually widen Carling, whether it's with more lanes for traffic or cycling infrastructure. That is up to the city to decide. But it is certainly something that affects us. That being said, again, 45 meters, that's quite a deep lot. Usually we're looking at, like in the urban fabric in Ottawa, usually it's about 30 meters deep for a lot. So 45 meters gives us some flexibility to deal with on-site in terms of developing it and providing some appropriate separation distances from the surrounding lots. In terms of the existing policies, this is located in the general urban area. So that's the yellow hue that you can see on the site. In the general urban area, generally speaking, you're speaking of residential uses complemented with some commercial. So usually it's residential, but there's a wide variety of uses that are permitted. And also the building heights usually are low rise, and the city of Ottawa defines low rise as being 4 stories or less. That being said, there are certain provisions that do allow for greater height, which I'll get to in a second. Again, I just want to note the importance of Carling Avenue here, which is located in red on this map, just to the north of the subject lands. In terms of urban design best practices, it's often said that it's good to try to build buildings up to a height that matches the width of the roadway that it fronts on in order to appropriately frame the street. Now, we're not suggesting in any way that we're going to go up to 44.5 meters, which is what is going to be the ultimate build out of the Carling Avenue right-of-way. But given that it's such a wide street currently and is going to be even wider moving forward, it does provide us with an opportunity to, again, appropriately frame the street in this particular context. So in terms of the policies for taller buildings, as I previously mentioned, usually in the general urban area, building heights are low rise, 4 stories or less. There are 2 different ways that 2 different avenues through which the city will consider taller building heights. So one of them is that you front on an arterial road and you're in proximity to rapid transit, or you're in an area that's already characterized by taller buildings or sites zoned to permit taller buildings. Now, in our particular context, there are no existing taller buildings. That being said, in looking at the zoning map in front of you here, on the property immediately to the west, as well as one property over to the east. The two properties that are zoned R5A H34. H34 means that you're permitted to build up to 34 meters in height. I would say that usually you look at 3 meters per story. So that could easily be 10 to 11 stories in height. It's important again to note that our site is already permitted to build up to 18.5 meters, which can correspond roughly to 6 stories. So in our view, looking at the context of the properties to the west and to the east, there is an opportunity for us to look at taller building heights because those other two parcels do have that permission to go higher. So in terms of the existing zoning, this is zoned general mixed use, subzone 20, exception 26, 28, and a height suffix of 18.5 meters. I know that's a lot of technical words. Basically what it means in the GM zone, there is a wide variety of uses that are permitted here. Residential uses also, you can look at bar, hotel, nightclub, restaurants. You could have a couple of restaurants with drive-through facilities. It could be an office, medical facility, retail, service and repair shop, and also a commercial parking lot. It's currently permitted and operating a temporary commercial parking lot. Again, speaking to residential, a retirement home can be permitted here, and low to mid-rise buildings as well. Mid-rise buildings being up to 9 stories according to the city's definitions. And just a quick look at the zoning provisions for the general mixed use zone. You've got front and interior side yard setbacks of 3 meters, a rear yard setback of 7.5 meters. Again, the building height at 18.5 meters. And there's a few other provisions that we'd have to look at closely to make sure to try to comply with, or if we can come up with a better design that does need certain amendments to the zoning, sometimes that's possible. So we'll look at that closely through our rezoning application process. So with that in mind, I'll hand it off to Matthew Mantle of Parsons. He's our transportation engineering consultant to share a few words on transportation for the site.
Thank you, Nico. The existing property is occupied by a restaurant and has been providing satellite parking for the D&D Carling campus, as Nico has partly mentioned before. The proposed site driveway will be connecting to and from Carling and is proposed to allow full movement access. The proposed development is also forecasted to produce less than 50 vehicles per hour during the morning and afternoon peak hours. This assumes 30% of the site generated traffic will be using transit and another 15% using active modes. Next slide.
Sorry, forgot to unmute myself. So we're not going straight to questions. We're actually going to move to the design presentation by Ryan Kuhlwein. So Ryan, if you'd like to pull up your presentation to show us the design of the site, that would be much appreciated.
Okay. All right, thanks for that, Nico. So my name is Ryan Kuhlwein. I'm a principal at Project One Studio. So we are the architects for the project. To be clear, we feel really fortunate to be involved with this project. You know, we do a number of these types of projects in the city. And we really prefer to work on sites that have a lot to offer, that have complexity, that have challenges, but that also have really good qualities to them. And we certainly see this existing with this particular site. One of the first things we noticed, especially when we're talking about a multi-unit residential building, is the opportunity to provide views of the river from this site because we're in very close proximity. At the same time, we have a very busy street in Carling Avenue that we need to respect. And our primary focus in a number of the things that we've designed in this project is to respect the context, respect our neighbors, and that means respect the low-rise development that is to the south of the project. So we've made a number of cues here, a number of design decisions here that are in favor of the project, but that are also a sign of respect to our immediate context and trying our best to be good neighbors to those people around us. So the first thing that I'd like to draw your attention to is our intent here was to come up with a fairly slender floor plate. And we looked at a number of different options in developing this site before we settled on what we're showing you today. So as Nico mentioned, as of right, we could go 6 stories and avoid a lot of the additional meetings that we're doing right now. But a 6-story mass really leads to what we would call a bar-shaped building or a U-shaped building that would creep closer to the south property line. And that it really isn't something that we were interested in. We also weren't interested in the amount of site coverage that we would get if we did something that was kind of long like this, that had little dovetails at the corners. And we weren't crazy about how much traffic that would throw along the south property line and basically forcing the main entrance of the building to be on the back side of the building. We really, again, wanted to respect our neighbors to the south. So instead, we've got a 2-building strategy. And while we might have additional height, the actual density or the gross building area that we have with these 2 buildings is less than what is permitted as of right by zoning with a 6-story volume. Part of what we've done here as well is try to push the buildings as far away as possible from the south property line. So we're dealing with floor plates that are on the narrow side to try to make the building slender. But one of the bigger inconveniences here is this road widening allowance that we've had to give up in favor of Carling Avenue. So this averages around 7.5 meters that we've had to give up. And that results in a net loss, with the front yard setback being 3 meters, it results in a net loss of about 5 meters. So as Nico mentioned, the rear yard setback is 7.5 meters. We have the buildings in general set at around 11.6 meters. So we're providing an additional 4 meters of setback. But our original intent was to actually push these buildings another 5 meters further away from that south property line to provide that much more buffer. Unfortunately, this is just not a possibility. There was no way for us to avoid this road widening, and so it forced us to push the buildings further south against our intent for the project. Coming into the building, we've got drop-off and visitor parking in front of both of the podiums or both sides of the building. We then move past this drive-off through the visitor parking, make a turn. There'll be ample landscaping across the south property line. Fencing here, the idea is really to create kind of a green barrier so that our friends to the south have privacy. And then this directs traffic down towards a below-grade parking structure, which means that just about all the parking for the project, hang on one second here, I have the number. For the project, we are providing 272 parking spaces, and we only have 18 parking spaces that are at grade. So the vast majority of the parking here is below grade. And what this is allowing us to do is to provide ample green space around the entire building. So we can see some green space on the west building here, and then on the east building where we have a bit more space because we don't have that parking ramp. We have an at-grade amenity area, which is meant for the quiet enjoyment of the residents. And again, you can see the extent of the landscaping that we're proposing here. The underground parking structure actually is set off the rear property line, which actually allows us to plant trees along this wall or along this south property line. Often, if you're right on top of the parking deck, it really places a limitation on how much planting we can do in those areas. So the intent here is really to create a good amount of separation and to provide quiet outdoor amenity that neighbors onto these properties to the south. We have a 4th floor amenity space for the residents. But this is directed towards the front of the building. So again, we have very little concern about overlook and privacy. As we go up above the 4th floor, the building steps in over 2 meters on the south side, over 2 meters on the north side. So again, these 4th floor amenity spaces are created from these terraces as a result of the building stepping in. And these terraces are also directed towards the front of the building, also limiting overlook, privacy concerns, noise considerations, this type of thing. The building being to the north of these subject lands also eliminates shadowing as a concern. So there will be no impact to access of daylight for these houses to the south. Moving to the next slide. So this shows the ground floor plan. So we can see as we come in here, we've got residential lobbies, we've got generous bike rooms, garbage storage rooms at grade, and then a mix of 1 and 2 bedroom units. And I'd just like to draw your attention here too, that the intent here certainly is not to provide, shoebox units in this building. We have the odd smaller unit on the ground floor just to make way for exit corridors, but in general, the average unit size here is quite generous for what we're seeing in multi-unit residential buildings, with quite a few 2-bedroom units that are at or above 1,000 square feet. So these are very livable suites. These will have longer term tenants. We're certainly making the opportunity here for family size units as well. Moving up the building, we can see the typical spread for units. One of the things that we're doing on the front of the building here too is providing very deep terraces for the front here. I think as we've all gone through recently, understanding the importance of having private outdoor space, if you're not fortunate enough to have, a detached house, having your own pocket of outdoor area that you can enjoy, kind of the outdoors, your own private space and the outside is very important. So we've actually tied this in and made this a design feature for the project. So the balcony kind of straddles the living space of the units. And then as we get up to the 5th floor, the building checks in. We have a much more rectilinear floor plate with a really expressive series of balconies. And what we're doing with the articulation of the building is really making a stronger, heavier feeling building at the base, the podium, going with ideas of reinforcing streetscape, feelings of permanence. And then on the upper levels of the building, we make the building much, much lighter, much glassier, and really focus on interesting balcony configurations to make the most of the potential views towards the water. The balconies in the front, I would also mention, the balconies on the north side of the building are significantly deeper than those on the south side of the building. Again, we're trying to limit the projections that we have off the south side of the building, again, to reduce overlook and privacy concerns. I mentioned parking, so we have 126 parking stalls on the P1 level, 128 on the P2. Very efficient parking layout, and the net result of this is that there is very, very little surface parking in this development in favor of a considerable amount of green space. This is an area breakdown for the project. So we'll get back to this in just a second. The total area for the development, gross building area, for the project is around 18,000 square meters. This is a number that we'll come back to later, but I did want to draw your attention here. So we are slightly under in terms of the parking requirement, but we are going to meet the visitor parking space requirement. So out of the total of 272 parking spaces that we're providing, that leaves 229 parking spaces for the residents, which still exceeds a 1-to-1 parking ratio for the 216 residential units that this project will bring. Now, getting to the design of the outside of the building. So we recognize this site as, an important stretch of Carling. Any new building that we want to build should have character, should speak to the site, should speak to the goals of the project. So we have a building that has a podium level in brick. Brick is, a traditional masonry, or sorry, traditional residential building material. Identifies as long lasting, as residential, as neighborhood friendly. So it really serves to create a street edge along Carling. And then you can see these reveals that carve out these deep balconies that we've got. So it provides ample outdoor living space for the residents of these suites. And then up above, the building transforms and becomes something that steps in and becomes something much lighter. And you can see a really expressive tone and articulation of balconies that have fritted glass. So it provides translucency to these balconies. So this helps for a number of reasons. It provides a bit more privacy for the residents. It does a good job of shielding things that residents sometimes put on balconies that other people don't want to look at. And in general, it helps to make the building look a lot more uniform and focus on the expression of the balconies as opposed to what's specifically on the balcony. Part of what we're doing here too is articulation of the glass and playing with reflectivity and tint of different glazing panels to really create an interesting texture with the glazed portion of the building on the upper levels. Now you can see that there's quite a bit of glass on this north elevation. So again, we're making the most of where this building is sited in the city relative to the water and these water views. These are important things and unique aspects to the site. So we certainly want to focus on this. And so this is another view down Carling. But when we get to the back side of the building, we do change our articulation, our patterns, and there's quite a bit more solid panel. Again, just in thinking that it's a bit more appropriate gesture when you're looking out over an existing neighborhood to not be quite as transparent and glassy. This right here is a view at grade showing the east building. So we can see entry condition in through here. We've identified entry with these colorful canopies that extend below the second floor level to really make clear where we enter buildings. But really the thing to draw our attention to here too is the cadence of the recesses in these kind of townhouse-like units that face the street. All of them having direct access to the street, livable suites that have outdoor space, deep balconies, and then we can see these really expressive balconies on the upper floors here. So building view of the entire development together, and then an impression of this green barrier that we're going to see in between, and really quite a bit of breathing room between these buildings as well. So whereas the zoning would permit a dense block of building to span the entire site, we really felt it more in keeping with the project and in keeping with a better development to separate these as two separate buildings and have them taper as they climb. This is the view of the back of the project. So again, all the lower levels have semi-recessed balconies. Things do not project far from the back side of the building. And then as we go up, we can see here certainly a far less amount of glass than we saw on the upper levels of the building. And these balconies keep the same kind of expressive character, but they're certainly much shallower than what we saw on the north side of the building. This slide here is kind of a zoning, what we call a comparative analysis. So the magenta trapezoid is an extension of the as of right development for the project. So this reflects the amount of area that could be built as of right for current zoning, overlaid what we have proposed here. So we can see how large this volume would allow you to go. And the amount of breathing room that we're providing by separating these buildings into two components as opposed to just going with one large block. And to that effect, the building area permitted under zoning would be around 27,000 square meters, whereas what's being proposed to you today, even though it is taller by 3 stories, is significantly less than the overall permitted envelope as of right by zoning. The other thing to point out is that we are not close to what the setbacks are. So I mentioned the rear yard setback, but the interior side yard setbacks as well, wanting to have as much of a buffer as we can. We're certainly, or we're significantly larger than the 3-meter setback that is the minimum from the zoning at 4.7 meters. And those are pinch points too. We certainly have areas on these interior setbacks where we're much further from the property line. So in conclusion, we really feel like this is certainly the height is never a popular thing with neighborhood residents, but we feel like this is a very responsive development, responsive design to where the project is located, and will really provide some interesting aspects, not only to the building, but to the neighborhood, to the community, and really do justice this wonderful site that this project is located on. Thank you.
Well, maybe with that, I think that generally concludes our presentation. I wonder though, I was cheating a little bit and I was looking at the chat and there's a couple things that maybe I could bang out right away. And we also had the benefit of those previous comments and I know that there's been an interest in retaining some commercial on the site potentially, like to complete the neighborhood a little bit, like an opportunity for a coffee shop or something like that. I guess first comment is that the zoning does permit commercial, and that wouldn't change as part of the zoning amendment. The guys are looking at potential commercial, but it does have, a degree of viability. Like, this is not a strip of Carling that is characterized by a lot of commercial uses other than the next door, which I believe the property is for sale as well. So there is a concern as to whether it would be viable beyond the immediate needs. If it was a Starbucks or a Bridgehead or something along those lines, is something that the guys are comfortable looking at, but it also has some implications in terms of parking and things like that, where you'd potentially have to add more parking on the surface to service the commercial. So while it's something that they are okay looking at and seeing if it can work, be mindful that there are some reservations as to how viable it'll be and what the impacts would be to the project. I saw some comments, well, two comments, one related to wind. So as part of the site plan control, which Nico explained was very much a technical process, there will be a requirement for a wind study. The wind study looks at livability of the balconies. It looks at livability from a wind perspective of the at-grade terraces, the 4-story terraces, the amenity areas in the rear. So there is a fairly sophisticated process of assessing wind patterns in the area. And I know some of them come off the water. And then what are the implications for the livability of the project? There is also, the city does have bird guidelines now. And I saw some of the comments in the chat feature there. Ryan mentioned fritted glass, which is a way of signaling that there are various techniques that architects use. Fritted means that it's got a bit of a texture and a pattern, which signals to birds that this is not clear sky. So there are numerous ways, I think, that architects have been using regardless of the city's new guidelines. But the fritted pattern has that additional benefit of providing some privacy both to the people on the balcony and then the people on abutting lots. But it also serves to clean up a little bit the balcony so that you can't tell as much that there's, sometimes people put recycling boxes and bikes out there, and that conceals that a little bit. And then the last thing I'll say is, we often tell our clients sometimes building to the zoning is not always the best approach from a design and compatibility perspective. And that's really the crux of this discussion tonight is that, yeah, the existing zoning has permissions for both building volumes, setbacks. Like, for instance, you heard Nico and Ryan say that the rear yard setback can be as shallow as 7.5. But when the city processes a zoning bylaw amendment, they get very specific and they use zoning schedules, which would allow the city here to provide enhanced rear yard building setbacks. So what you heard from Ryan was we're proposing 11.6 meters, I think, to the 4-story portion, and then almost 14 meters or a little over 14 meters for the tower portions, the 9 stories, to increase the building setbacks as we increase the height. And then those are things that are built into the zoning. So there's an element of certainty when you do that, the height is really a function of additional setbacks. So I'll leave it to that because that's what I saw in the chat function. And then we're happy to answer questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Miguel. I saw a question about possible flooding, and that is part of what the city goes through when a design comes forward is drainage. So those issues are looked into as well. So just so you're aware that is part of the process. A question about switching it from north to south. I think they mean like to have the building go sideways. I don't think it has the width for, obviously the site is longer. I'm not sure if I'm understanding.
I think, yeah, I think they're suggesting maybe the buildings could be perpendicular to Carling as opposed to, and you know, it's funny. We actually looked at this site on behalf of others. There was several developers that looked at this site before the guys did, and I do recall seeing a configuration like that. But because the depth is not the same as the width, some of those proposals were in the 12 to 15 story range to get to those same kind of densities, if you will. And like it really didn't afford much opportunity for transition. If you were to reorient, for instance, to three smaller buildings, you would end up pushing the height closer in terms of to Elkwater Avenue to get, you know, comparable densities. So.
Okay, they're asking about storage on site for stormwater. Is that for this size of building, is that requirement? I've seen some that have had to do that. Potentially,
It's a good question in that as we didn't bring our civil consultant because we rarely get stormwater questions, but without simplifying too much, the city would not allow drainage onto abutting properties. They will likely have to, well, they will have to direct their drainage to Carling Avenue into the city storm sewers. And if there are restrictions on releasing that stormwater, then at times you have to put a below grade storage tank, but that's very rare that the city has significant drainage constraints in a municipal right of way.
Okay, thank you. Just because Nico mentioned it earlier about what the other properties are around, the gas station property, I guess they're talking about Ralph's, is that zoned also for 34 meters?
So I can answer that. No, so that property is zoned, it's local commercial, and the permitted building height for that one is 12.5 meters. So it's certainly not the same as the other two properties, which allow the 34 meters.
Okay, thank you. And is the building for senior living? Well, it's a good question because I think it's designed for empty nesters, I guess is probably the best term, but it's not technically seniors. Is that?
Yeah, it's not going to be a retirement home. Certainly that has a different implications in terms of services and all that. I think the intent for Ralph and Edward is to focus on the seniors market. And often that means doing certain things to the building, you know, designing the washrooms that are fully wheelchair accessible, things that may not be as important to younger tenants, but would be valuable to older tenants. So I think that's their intent right now in this area, to focus on that seniors driven market.
I think I can answer the question of elevators. I'm pretty sure yes, but perhaps you mean how many like would be required in buildings like that?
We'll have at least 2 per building, likely 3.
3 per building.
Yeah.
Okay, probably one of them being freight or something along that line.
Well, they're all sized, or 2,500 pounds is the standard elevator for this type of a building. Yeah, and then one of them would just be kind of used exclusively for move-in, move-outs when that type of thing was required. But having 3 gives you that flexibility.
Okay. In regards to the underground parking for 250 cars, how much space is allowed below? So in terms, I guess, in terms of proximity to the river, I don't think that's an issue for the river, but I'll let these guys answer.
Not something I'm aware of. Nico, Miguel, like.
Not sure I understand the question, but there is development on the north side of Carling, which would be in closer proximity to the river. I'm not sure I fully understand, but
I'm wondering if there's some sort of link to floodplain concerns with respect to proximity to the river. We're quite far away from that. So as far as I know, there's no at least from a zoning policy perspective, there's no cap on how deep you can dig.
Yeah, there's, and if anyone wants to check out, Ottawa shows the floodplain. So you can see for yourself. It's pretty much the units in Crystal Bay, like Rocky Point, Lock Isle, is in the floodplain, their properties. It doesn't go much beyond that, just on their north side of the road.
Somewhat related to that, it's usually a question that we get, but as part of the site plan, well, we are going to be submitting a geotech report as part of the zoning bylaw amendment, but that's a much more higher level report. And then there will be obligations for a much more detailed geotech report, which is going to guide Ryan in terms of his construction for that below grade and what kind of foundation and all those technical aspects. And as part of that analysis, there's sensitivity to abutting properties. The geotech report will also make recommendations as to how to monitor for the safety and protection of abutting properties, because we are in proximity to existing development. You can take some comfort that that this site is, I know it feels close to you at different times, but we do a lot of development downtown where you are quite literally a meter off an abutting property. So there's certainly techniques to protect for abutting properties. I don't know what the outcome of that report yet is, but at times geotech companies will offer to do offsite surveys to look at other buildings to make sure that there's pre and post assessments in the event of the construction technique. So there's all sorts of things that will be done for the geotech at the geotech stage and the site plan stage to protect those abutting properties.
Okay, a couple questions here. How can we get this development down to 3 stories to be compatible with the existing character of the neighborhood?
So again, the site is zoned for 6 stories. The intent here is to try to do it better than what the zoning permits. You heard from Ryan that we can do a 6-story building, essentially the same volume. We want to do it differently. We're proposing to go a little higher, and we want, if that's acceptable, but at the same time, in exchange for the height, there's better setbacks to the properties to the rear. There's still very large separation to the dwellings on the north side of Carling, so there won't be any shadowing impacts there. We're proposing to break the massing down into 2 buildings. Yes, higher, but better. Certainly from Carling Avenue's perspective as well. So I know it's not 3 stories. I know it's not in keeping with what the community would generally want. I mean, you should be aware that there are other properties along Carling that we referenced that do permit 10, 11-story buildings. Will they redevelop to that? Maybe, maybe not. But it does provide an opportunity to assess if the greater building height here, are we doing a better job, I guess is the question. So.
Rick Nelson's asking about how are residents going to cross Carling? In other words, are you going to work with OC Transpo on that and transportation? Because that is an issue if you're expecting people to use the transit system. And currently it's pretty minimal in that section. But how closely are you working on that?
When we go to submit our step 4, this is usually circulated to OC Transpo. So we will get comments back, but we will, since it's a concern, we'll reach out as well and see what are options. And it is quite far from the signalized intersections to walk to cross the road. So thank you.
Yeah, in terms of could the development contribute to putting in a crosswalk there, or
this would have to be investigated with transportation engineering services. Other departments will have to put input as well because they have specific requirements. So thank you for that comment as well. We'll take a look at that.
Thank you. Are these drawings available for distribution?
That's a pretty good question. I mean, I guess the short answer is this is being recorded and probably going to be on YouTube regardless. the only issue is, and I mentioned this earlier, they're not our final drawings. They're working drawings towards an application. I wonder if the best approach would be that once we're getting really close to submission, we circulate those drawings, because certain things may change, and then, you know, that way it avoids people bogging down into details that may change. I wonder if that's a compromise there, or?
Yeah, I think that's it. If you're going away with this, if you're looking at these drawings, then you can look at it, because this is a recording. You got to know that there's possibilities of change, because the city still hasn't looked at it. And even though they have worked somewhat with the city, there still could be some refinements based on a lot of the questions you've asked. It might change design somewhat. So so that's a consideration. So you know, you can't take it to you know, as being the absolute right now. But this is the direction they would like to go. Okay, there's a long question here from Mark Hollett about design material. To be more developed and less modern. The grass in front of the building on the rendering also appears as underdeveloped. It would be nice to promote a connection to the streetscape. Details of rendering appear minimal and simplified. Although popular in the city, the neighborhood has much softer tones with human scale characteristics. So this will set a precedent for other buildings on Carling. Do you want to talk about that, Miguel? Because we talked a little bit about something like that earlier.
Well, I mean, I guess if I guess what the architect's going to say, he's going to say no. But you know, there is always efforts. I know, like, you know, there are efforts to make the building modern, and the feeling that we had as a group was, even though it might be seniors driven, it's still a very contemporary design, and that's not a bad thing. But certainly I wouldn't say that materials and everything else are finalized. I would also say that this is not a landscape plan. So this is, you know, more of a rendering, but as part of this exercise, there is going to be a landscape plan, which, you know, for instance, FOTEN are landscape architects as well, where there's going to be a very articulated design, linking it both like the internal sections, but then linking it to Carling Avenue, because I think we have a bit of a problem, to be honest, with Carling Avenue, in that the area between the two dash lines is going to be land that the city is going to acquire as part of that road widening. But we want to avoid a scenario where that's just grass, and the city is going to own that. But there are mechanisms where they do allow developers to landscape municipal right-of-way. I personally don't think it's ever going to be developed as a road. And the last thing we want is a strip of grass separating this project to Carling Avenue. So I think, you know, we'll work with the city to try to come up with a concept that's acceptable to them, that makes it better. It won't be just grass. It'll be something a little more dynamic than that.
Okay. There'll be a survey done. Oh, okay, you're going to do a survey. Okay. All right. It just, I realized you meant the other kind of survey. I was thinking land survey. And of course you mean a kind of a polling to the community. Thanks, Kevin. Will there be sound barrier fencing for the back property?
Another great question. So yes, as part of one, I see one there for a ramp, but just so you appreciate, and there's one drawing that kind of shows that a little bit. So the ramp is below grade, right? So the area where you see the two directional arrows is flush, is at grade. But then the ramp starts to go down, and it's pretty much a full floor below grade. So, and then along that edge there will be it's basically in a concrete box, which, so all the noise contained to the ramp and everything else will be below grade. So in practical terms, there will be very little inconvenience to the abutting properties. There will have to be a noise study as well. The noise study will look at rooftop mechanical. It'll look at the mechanism for the door, all of those things. There will be a fence along the perimeter of the property, supplemented by landscaping. All of those things are intended to retain privacy for the houses on Elkwater, but then at the same time mitigate for any noise or headlights, you know, things like that. So it'll be an opaque fence that will, so there won't be any headlight views from to the dwellings to the south. So I don't know if that helps.
Okay, thank you. Okay, now, okay, Art is talking about the ramp being directly behind my house. Can you work closely with the people who live adjacent to the property? I think that would probably be the best way to ask that question.
Yeah, and a couple of thoughts is right now, like we're in a meeting and there's the broader community and that's great. But then in practical terms, there are people that are in closer proximity that we are probably going to develop a working relationship with to deal with issues. For instance, when you get to the site plan stage, and we've done this on numerous projects, we're proposing a fence at the back of the property. It's not just going to be, construction crew showing up and putting a fence. It'll be working with the abutting property owners to figure out how we do that. There's going to be existing vegetation that can be saved and protected, supplemented, all of these things. When you get into the weeds, you start dealing directly with the abutting property. So they're happy. There's condo corporations on to the west. They're going to have to be consulted when all of those things happen during construction. It's a long way off if you remember Nico's first slide, but yes, opportunities to work with the abutting property owners to have the best possible construction process.
Okay. Steve wants to know if I can incorporate the residents' concerns. Steve, during the process, there is an opportunity to do it directly because if this is a planning application that goes to planning committee, you can not only write your comments, you can even go before planning committee if there is any outstanding concerns. That's how it works. So you can, of course, once this is finalized, we could even have another meeting if necessary, but it's guaranteed that you can write to planning committee so that all the people who are on the planning committee can be aware of all the concerns. And I always go to planning committee for applications in Bay Ward to make sure they're voiced, but you can appear as well. So those are many options. So yes, you'll definitely get heard on all your concerns. The question about condos, is it condos or rental? Which of course is up to you.
They're rentals. They're rental
Yes.
units.
Yeah. Yeah. And just so you know that is totally, that's something the city cannot dictate any more than someone buys a house if they rent it or live in it themselves. That is something that the owner can decide. Right now, there is a shortage of rental, which is definitely an incentive for developers to build more rental at this time. Okay, we got something about the parking ramps to the west of the property, and how about moving them to the west of the property in the triangular section of land?
So the intent here was to shorten the area of surface, any asphalt on the surface of the property. We looked at a number of different configurations for where paving would go. Having a drive aisle between the building and the property line was one of the things that we did look at. But ultimately, we returned to this idea where it was along the back of the building just because it allows for a full green buffer behind the majority of the building and along the interior side yards as well.
Okay,
So it
thank you.
was basically a choice of green over asphalt is what we used as a priority here.
Okay, I know we're over time, so I'm just going to ask the last two questions. One is the projected timeline for approval construction.
So, we haven't even submitted yet. Typically, a zoning amendment takes 8 to 10 months to go through the city process. So let's say 8 months. Then we still have to do a site plan control application. Normally what we do is we submit that a little bit before the going to planning committee so that we can finalize any zoning details that are problematic. So that now you're almost into a year and a half. So we're expecting about a year to a year and a half for municipal approvals.
Yeah.
And then, we then you file a building permit. So you're probably looking at about 12 to 15 months before we can
Okay.
put shovel to the ground.
Donna has a great question. How about affordable units? And does the city have authority to insist on a certain number?
I mean, our experience is given, well, I mean, I don't know. Yes, the city does have mechanisms to encourage affordable housing. I think the intent is going to be for the guys to assess the market in this area and figure out what the rents are. I'm gonna say they're not anywhere near that step of assessing, on a square foot basis, how much this is going to rent for. Oftentimes what happens is some of the smaller units tend to be more in the affordable range because of their size on a square foot basis. So I don't know if there's any other thoughts, Ryan, but
Yeah, not that I've heard of at this time. I mean, we always hear this as comments that come up. The challenge is without an incentive program from the city, there's a number of factors that we are up against with every development, because we're doing our best to do well-designed buildings that respond to any number of factors, from energy efficiency to design standards that the city is implementing, to bird safe glass, to all these considerations, landscaping, making these really truly great environments, and all of these things have costs. So it certainly adds to the burden of the overall project budget, and so then at the end of the day, affordable housing units really, they become a difficult target to approach if we want to meet all these other targets that we're striving to meet with the project.
And I could just say, Donna, generally what the city does is they put more pressure on buildings that are close to transit. That is where they want affordable housing units the most. So that's where they put the effort of making sure that it's, if it's affordable, that means that a person doesn't necessarily have a car. For example, at 100 Bayshore, we have 45 affordable housing units. So and that was pushed on by the city, by myself, to make sure that was done, and it's done in cooperation with CMHC. So that is how it works. But are they going to push forward here? It's not as likely, I'll be honest. We want housing to be affordable everywhere, but it's not likely that this would be as a target as something that is close to transit, which we call transit-oriented development, and therefore a target.
And just to clarify my comments, Donna, because I say I don't look at the chat, but sometimes I do. And obviously the guys have run high level numbers in terms of the land costs and the construction costs. But what I was getting at is, once you get into the design of the units, that's when the developers start making decisions in terms of the fixtures and the fit ups of the units and where they think they're going to land in that market. And as you can imagine, certain decisions in that will affect the rents, right? So they got to figure out where the rent structure is going to be in this area, and then what kind of units they want to deliver inside. And that's what I mean by I don't think they have a rent structure yet, because they have to figure out how they're going to design the internal units and all of those little things. So. Okay.
Well, thank you. Miguel, if there's any further questions for you, and someone asked about, what's your title? You're with Foten Planning and Design. Maybe you can just explain that a bit of how that works.
Sure. So, different consultants have different roles within an approval process. We are the land use planners. So Foten, I'm a partner and an owner at Foten, and we're a land use planning firm in Ottawa here that has offices in Toronto and Kingston as well. And we assist clients in development applications. So we do the project management. We will also prepare a planning rationale that will address some of the city's policies that Nico elaborated on. And we're going to try to consolidate a lot of what we do in our planning rationale in response to some of these comments. And I think we'll be talking in the future for sure with this community, and again, we have a long process ahead of us, and we haven't yet submitted.
Okay. Art was just asking it was already mentioned, Art, the owners of the property from Montreal. So Mr. Hayes, I'm sorry, I better let you do it because I've forgotten the other name. Apologies. I don't have it in front
So
of me.
the two owners are myself, Edward Hayes, and the others are Ralph Esposito. We're property owners in Montreal and in other parts of the country.
Thank you. Apologies. So, yeah, so thank you everyone for coming out tonight. It's a beautiful evening, and yet you've come here to talk about something new for your community. And I appreciate Fotan and the whole team, Mr. Hayes, and all for coming out to talk about this before it goes into the city for final approval. This is the time for flexibility. And I think there's some great questions that were asked. I think that's important to have it. It's good to get to know who's immediately behind, people like yourself, Art, so that you can work closely, so that you are feeling that you're getting, you're not having something that's a surprise. So I think that is important that you know the process. We didn't even talk about construction, and of course that's a big messy part. So, and that's always important to keep in touch with people about if it gets, assuming we get past that point. Okay, but excellent questions, and thank you all for coming out. Miguel, we can have it so people can contact you directly if you leave your email, or they can contact me and we can forward any questions that further on these on what you've proposed.
Sure.
All right.
Right.
And we'll certainly keep in touch with everyone on next steps. Okay. So have a great rest of your evening. It's still light out. Isn't that great?
Yes.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank
Take
you very
care.
much.
All right.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you
Bye.
all.